Namaste, good morning, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Sunday morning service. Om Yo Brahmanam Vidadhati Purvam Yo Vai Vedangscha Prahinoti Tasmai Tam Hadevam Atma Buddhi Prakasham Mumukshur Vai Sharanamaham Prapadye. We who seek liberation take refuge in that infinite light, who is the origin of this universe, the origin of the Creator himself, and the source of the infinite knowledge known as Veda. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So welcome back to our Vedanta Society lectures and classes. This is the beginning, not today, we began on last Tuesday, but this is the first Sunday service of our new season. And so I'm glad, I should say, to be back and to be in harness, as they say, once again, giving classes and lectures, because this really is why we are here, is to serve the public and to make the teachings of Vedanta, as far as we are capable individually, those of us who have to give classes and talks, to make the teachings of Vedanta accessible to the public. It's this that gives our work a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. And so, again, I'm glad to be back, glad to see the few of you who are able to register and to come and to have more on the live stream. So, yesterday, as we know, you couldn't help but know if you have any connection to the outer world at all. Yesterday was September 11th. And of course, there was a great deal of talk on all media about September 11th, 2001. But for those of us in the Vedanta movement, we know that there were two September 11ths. There was September 11th, 2001, which was much in the news yesterday. But there was another September 11th, 1893, which for us is more important, and I think for the world will in time be seen as far, far, far more important. When September 11th, 2001 is just a footnote in history, September 11th, 1893 will still be seen as a turning point in world history, because that is a time when Swami Vivekananda made his appearance for the first time on the world stage. He had given a few talks in India. He had given a talk at a college in Hyderabad. He had given parlor talks. He had met with many people and spoken informally and a few times formally in India. And after coming to the United States, he spoke a few times in Massachusetts, Annisquam, and other places before he came back to Chicago for the Parliament of Religions, which opened on September 11th, 1893. Now, that was an important occasion, not just for us, but it was important for others as well. For instance, Dharmapala, who became a friend of Swami Vivekananda's, until they had a falling out later, because Dharmapala didn't like certain things that Swamiji said in his public lectures in India. But there was a friendship between them, and it was important to Dharmapala because it was sort of an opening to present Buddhism to the West. And there were other teachers as well who traced their world mission back to 1893 Parliament of Religions. So there are many interesting features of the Parliament of Religions, and I'm not here to speak about the Parliament of Religions today. But what I am going to speak about, and then I'll come back to say a little bit more about the Parliament itself. What I am speaking about today is Vedanta and the InterSpiritual movement. And I chose the topic because it is connected to the Parliament of Religions. certainly with Swami Vivekananda's presentation at the Parliament of Religions. So the Parliament of Religions, as I was saying, it was important from several standpoints. It was important to certain traditions because it was their opening onto the world stage, as it was with Swami Vivekananda. But of those teachers, certainly the one who had the greatest influence and the most lasting influence was Swami Vivekananda himself. And he indeed had told Swami Turiyananda when he met him in Mumbai before leaving for the West, he told him that something tells me that this parliament is being organized for this, meaning for himself. And he said it that way for this because he wasn't taking it personally, that it's being organized for Swami Vivekananda. No, it was being organized for Sri Ramakrishna's message to come out through him. And so he spoke in that impersonal way about it was organized for this. So Swamiji knew the importance of the parliament. That's why he went. He had the feeling that it had great importance for the future and for Sri Ramakrishna's work, though all the evidence is he didn't know what it was at that time. In fact, even after the parliament, it took some time before he began to realize what his purpose in America was. At first, he thought, during the parliament and after the parliament, that he was in America to collect money to start his work in India. It was only by the end of 1894, that is a year and a half after his coming to America, that he realized that, as he said to an audience, I have a message for the West as Buddha had a message for the East. And so that's an extraordinary statement because Swamiji was someone who was a deep student of history. He knew who the Buddha was. He knew the importance of the Buddha's message and how it had transformed the whole Eastern world. And so to say that I have a message for the West as Buddha had a message for the East, that's a tremendous thing. Swamiji knew the significance of his words. And so by that time, he had realized that, no, I have a message here. I'm not just collecting money to start work for the regeneration of India, but there's something much bigger. There's a minor parallel that's interesting, and that is St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi, when he first had his spiritual awakening, the beginning of his spiritual awakening was when he suddenly had an intense desire to know God. And he gave up everything all of his ordinary pursuits and everything, and he began to pray in the church of St. Damien outside of Assisi. And there one day, after long prayer, the crucifix itself spoke to him and said, Francis, repair my church. So he thought that Jesus, from the crucifix, meant fix St. Damien's church, because that was the church he was praying in, and it was falling down. The stones were tumbling down. No one cared for it. So he began to clean it. He began to repair the masonry. He began to put it back together, build it into a nice church once more with his own hands. But then he realized, no, Jesus didn't mean repair this one little church. He meant to repair the Christian church, repair Christianity itself. And that really was what St. Francis did with the rest of his life and the influence of his life after him. Even today, the present Pope, Pope Francis, took his inspiration from St. Francis of Assisi. And so as St. Francis of Assisi saw that, no, my work is not to repair a simple, humble country church, but the Christian church itself, Swami Vivekananda saw that his mission was even bigger, that he was not there to repair India, which of course is much bigger than fixing a church, but not just to repair India, but to give a message to the whole world. And so the parliament is where he opened with that. So one of the interesting things about his teachings at the parliament is, if you look at especially his paper on Hinduism, you find that the essence of his entire later message is found in that beginning talk. is quite astonishing, because Swamiji learned many things as the years went by, as he taught, as he traveled around America, traveled around Europe, went back to India, came back to America. There's so many influences that he absorbed, so many things he learned, so many ways his thought matured. But the essence of his message was already made in that first, or his major talk, not his first talk at the Parliament. It was after several talks, but it was his major talk, the paper on Hinduism. So one of the things that the Parliament of Religions did, which is more pertinent to the talk today, is that it was the beginning of the InterSpiritual movement. And I'll explain what I mean by InterSpiritual and why I'm not using the term interreligious in a little bit. So just accept the term right now, InterSpiritual. But it was the beginning of the InterSpiritual movement. The Parliament of Religions was organized in Chicago in 1893. By some, it was organized to show the superiority of Christianity, to invite representatives of other religious traditions to Chicago, where the whole world could see the superiority of Christianity. But of course, it turned out quite differently. Swami Vivekananda, Dharmapala, and some of the other speakers were the stars of the parliament, not the Christian ministers, though they had their best speakers there. And some of them certainly spoke very well, but they weren't the stars of the parliament. And so, but there were others who, I forget his first name, but Mr. Snell. He was one of the organizers of the scientific section of the parliament, and also very interested in the Parliament of Religions. And his idea was to broaden the idea of religion. He had a more universalist approach to religion, and so he and a few had that idea of learning, being open to other religious traditions, learning about them. And so there was some of that. But the main organizers actually, again, had the intention of showing the superiority of Christianity. But because it did bring together traditions from all over the world, it was the first time in world history that such a parliament had been held. In other parts of the world, before travel was as easy as it had become by the 1890s, there were in other parts of the world minor gatherings of religious leaders from the area. 2 or 3 or 4 traditions through history had gotten together to discuss their ideas and differences and similarities, etc. For instance, Emperor Akbar had held a meeting of religious leaders in India of that time, Muslim, Hindu, Jain, etc., in order to discuss religion. But these were very small and localized affairs. So this was the first time in world history where leaders of religions from all over the world got together and presented their ideas. So it was the beginning of the InterSpiritual movement, and Swami Vivekananda was its greatest spokesman, because he spoke to the heart of the idea itself of InterSpirituality, that is, the harmony of all religions. Other people had come to present their viewpoint, to speak of their idea, their tradition, and to present that tradition and show its glory. And some came in sympathy with others. Others came without any sympathy for the others, with the idea that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. But many came with a sympathy, but still not with the idea that all religions are basically true. They came with the idea that, yes, I'm open to others, let others be, but certainly my tradition is the best. Swami Vivekananda, however, presented an idea through which all religious thinking, all sincere religious thinking, all sincere religious effort of all traditions could be understood as a common impulse within the human spirit, a common impulse to attain to a deeper truth. And so that, I think, is one of the several reasons why he made such an impact on the parliament, because he was the only one who really spoke to the idea that should have been behind the parliament, and the idea which was evident in the parliament, and yet which no one recognized and no one spoke about. Other things, of course, were the tremendous spiritual power which he had, which certainly it was a response to that which made on his opening speech on September 11th, which was a very short talk, which made everyone stand up and applaud for several minutes after he said, "Sisters and brothers of America." It was that tremendous spiritual power which came through his words and affected everyone in the audience. But it was also what he had to say that was significant as well. And when you think about it, what Swamiji said at the Parliament of Religions was very radical. It was extraordinarily radical what he said. If you think about America at that time, the 1890s, the famous agnostic, what was his name? I forget it now. He became a friend of Swami Vivekananda's. He was Robert Ingersoll. He was a famous agnostic at the time. In fact, some of my relatives, even back in the 1950s and 60s, still remembered Robert Ingersoll, who had passed away half a century before. So he was very famous at that time. He became a friend of Swamiji's. He told Swamiji that, "Swamiji, if you had come to this country 50 years earlier, you would have been tarred and feathered and dragged through the streets of this country." That is, he would have been killed for the things that he said at the parliament. And so even in 1893, things were so conservative. People were not used to Christianity being challenged in any way. That was just unheard of. No one would dare to do it. Except for another white Western male like Robert Ingersoll. And even he had to be bold in order to preach agnosticism openly in America. So even when Swamiji spoke in 1893, it was still a very conservative religious environment in which he spoke, to which he spoke. So the radical nature of what he said can't be forgotten. So now, let me say a word about interspirituality, because that's the topic of the talk, Vedanta and the interspiritual movement. And that is what Swamiji really should be recognized. And in the future, I think he will be recognized as the beginning impulse out of which that has grown. Now it's not associated with his name, but certainly we see that he sowed the seeds which later took life as the interspiritual movement. So let me first make some distinctions. There's something called Ecumenism, beginning with an E, E-C, Ecumenism, the Ecumenical Council of Churches and so forth. Ecumenism means finding unity among the Christian churches, because according to the Christian Bible, Jesus founded the Christian church, and it was a unity. And among the disciples, it remained a unity. But then over the centuries, it divided and became subdivided. And in the recent centuries, especially in America, it divided, the divisions proliferated. And so the ecumenical movement was to try to bring unity among Christian churches. But that's a very limited unity, just among Christian churches. Then there have been organizations like the National Conference of Christians and Jews. Nowadays, they call themselves just the National Conference because they have tried to expand beyond that. But there was a recognition that ecumenism is not enough. That we Christians share with our Jewish brothers and sisters so many things. We have come out of the Jewish tradition, and so let's join together with the Jewish faith as well in promoting understanding and harmony. And so they founded organizations like the National Conference of Christians and Jews, to bring those together. And that gradually began to include Muslims, because they realized that Muslims are part of the Abrahamic tradition. They go back to Ibrahim. And so Christians, Jews, and Muslims try to bring some sort of understanding, not harmony, because each one still believed that we're right and the others are wrong, and no one really challenged that. But at least let's learn to talk together and be sympathetic. I may be right, but that doesn't give me the right to destroy you. I may be right, you may be wrong, but let's be friendly. so let's get the Abrahamic traditions together. And then we went beyond that, especially in the 60s when the immigration laws in the United States liberalized. And many people from India and other countries began to come. And suddenly there was a large Asian population, a growing and active and educated Asian population. And so there was a recognition that we need to bring a larger religious harmony. Again, not that all are true. We may be true and everybody else wrong, but we have to learn to get together, get along together. And so the interreligious movement was born. So you start with ecumenism, bringing Christian denominations together, but just Christian. And then you have the bringing the Christians and Jews together, and then Christians, Jews, and Muslims into the Abrahamic traditions, and then the interreligious movement, which was a little slow to get started because the Christians, Jews, and Muslims, many of them did not want to expand beyond that, because then you're getting into the heathens, the pagans, the idol worshippers, those horrible people who bow down before statues and things like that. So there were many who were somewhat resistant. In fact, in my experience, even with a conference I'll speak about in a minute, the Snowmass Conference, which was the most wonderful interreligious experience I had for a number of years. There was a rabbi who was a member of the conference when I first joined. And so the day I got there, I went around and introduced myself to people as a new member of the Snowmass Conference. And the rabbi was eating. And I went over to introduce myself to him. And he saw that I was, a Hindu, not from my skin, but from my dress. And he also knew that I was coming. And so when I went over just to say hello to him, people were eating, but it was an open seating for eating, and people were going around talking to each other during the meal. So I thought it'd be okay to go over to him. So he covered his food like that and said, "Some traditions are not kosher," meaning I was not kosher, and so I should stay away from him. Most rabbis are not at all like that. Most of the rabbis, and I've worked with many rabbis who are not at all like that, but he was super orthodox, didn't want anything to do with the non-kosher tradition. Non-kosher means, like in the Muslim tradition, which most of you here would recognize when they say something is haram. So something that's haram, that's non-kosher. So the interreligious movement began to grow because people recognized that we have to get along with all traditions. Everyone is here. We have to be liberal. We have to be open and sympathetic. And many people approached it with an open heart. They were genuinely interested in other traditions. There were some, again, who resisted it, but there were many who embraced it with an open heart. And with time, familiarity, it's said in English, there's the saying, familiarity breeds contempt. But there's the other side. Familiarity breeds appreciation as well. If you become familiar with people that you might have looked down on because of their ethnicity, their religion, their traditions, etc., if you get to know them, you see that, no, these are good people too. And so gradually that interreligious movement had a very good effect of opening people to the possibility of many different religious traditions. So again, interspirituality, however, is something much deeper than the interreligious movement. The interreligious movement, again, was not challenging anyone's beliefs about anything, including the belief almost everyone has that my tradition is true, other traditions are wrong. Except for the Hindu tradition, you find that that is present in most traditions. And my tradition is true, other traditions are wrong. So the interreligious movement didn't challenge that. But then in 1984, Father Thomas Keating, a Christian monk, a Trappist monk that I knew very well and worked with for many years, a very fine man. He died a few years ago at a very ripe old age. He was much older than me, and so a wonderful man. He had the idea he had been, well, let me start a little earlier and say that he had been the abbot of a Trappist monastery in Massachusetts, St. Joseph's Abbey in Spencer, Massachusetts. And after Vatican II, which was the Vatican II conference, which liberalized the Catholic Church in many ways, there was Pope John the 23rd had said, we have to open the doors and windows of our churches and let fresh air, fresh light in. We have to go out and meet other religions and be open to other people. And so as part of that, Father Thomas Keating, the abbot, young at that time, abbot of this Trappist monastery in Spencer, Massachusetts, he began to find out about other religious traditions in the area and invite teachers from Zen teachers and Vipassana teachers and Hindu teachers, yoga teachers, etc., to come to the monastery and talk to his monks. But the monks were not at all happy about it. And so in those days, the Trappists were silent. They didn't speak. And so even without speaking, he could see that people were not happy with bringing outside teachers to come and tell about their tradition. He wasn't trying to convert his monks, of course. He himself was a devout Catholic, but he was trying to open them to the possibility of other ways of looking at things. So finally, when he saw that there was building animosity to what he was doing, he asked for a vote of confidence, and he lost the vote of confidence. He had been elected abbot of the monastery for life. He didn't have to resign. He was elected for life. His position was secure. But when he lost the vote of confidence, he willingly gave up his position, and he went to St. Benedict's Trappist Monastery in Snowmass, Colorado, which is where I knew him. And so there, he continued his interest because he had heard these teachers from Zen and from Hinduism and yoga and Vipassana and so forth speaking, Tibetan Buddhism as well. And he saw that there was something of value in what they were saying, and he wanted to learn from it. And so he pursued his interest, and he developed the idea of getting together spiritual practitioners who practiced the teachings, the disciplines and the spiritual teachings of their tradition, and had some spiritual depth. That is, he wanted people who were not church or temple hierarchs, not people with official position and theologians with academic credentials and things. He wanted people who were deep practitioners of their tradition. Whether they had any official position within their religion was not so important. But if they were steeped in their tradition, that was important, and that they were deep practitioners of their tradition. He was interested in that. So he invited people from different traditions, Tibetan Buddhist, Native American, different Christian traditions, Hinduism, etc., Judaism, of course, Islam, Sufi Islam, to come to a meeting and to discuss their similarities or their differences as well, but just to present their ideas. And his idea was a wonderful idea, and this is what I participated in for many years. I wasn't a member from the beginning, but after a few years, I was invited to be part of it and became a very active part of it, and it enriched me a great deal. So his idea was that we want people who can share from the depths of their spiritual practice, not from theories, not from books, not from theology, not from dogma, not from creed, doctrine, etc., but people who could speak from experience. Not that he expected everyone to be an enlightened soul, but everyone who has practiced sincerely for a long time, they have some depth. It's something that they can speak of from the heart. So that's what he wanted. And so as they began to meet, every year they would have several days, meet for several days, staying together. And the press was not allowed because he didn't want people to be afraid of a reporter reporting something that would get back to their church or temple or synagogue or mosque and cause trouble for them. He wanted people to be able to speak freely. And in fact, Father Tom himself exemplified that. After I joined it, I heard him say several times, now I don't know if this, what he was about to say, I don't know if this is good Catholic doctrine. I don't know if it's Catholic doctrine at all, But nowadays, in my experience, this is what I see. And so it was that type of sharing that he wanted. And so we didn't have a name for it. We called it the Snowmass Conference. After I joined it also, it was the Snowmass Conference. But what we were doing was interspiritual work. The word interspiritual came from Wayne Teasdale, whom I met in 1993 at the second World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1993. 100 years. It took 100 years before there was another World's Parliament of Religions. So Wayne Teasdale came to that. I was there, and so we spoke together. He was a wonderful man. He was a Christian monk, but sort of a freelance Christian monk, meaning he wasn't cloistered in one particular monastery. He lived in India for some time. He wore Gerawa robes all of the time. Not as many Hindus think, not in order to fool Hindus into thinking that they were Hindu and then turn them into Christians. No, he wasn't like that. Some may do that, but many of those Christian monks who in India wear Gerawa cloth, it's because they really have taken on many of the ideas of Hinduism and are fully sympathetic with the essence of Hinduism. Not all of them. But many of them. And so Wayne Teasdale was one of those. And so he developed the idea of interspirituality as something which was different from interreligious dialogue. Interreligious dialogue, as I said, was when people began to feel that we need to get people of all religions together. They may all be wrong. They may all be heathen, most of them, but we need to get together, talk together, because we have some common interests as well. And so interreligious dialogue usually doesn't go very deep. But interspirituality was this idea which Thomas Keating had already started at Snowmass, where people who were practitioners would get together and share from the depths of spiritual experience what it was that they saw and understood of the spiritual life from the perspective of their tradition, but not from the doctrines and dogmas, but from the perspective of their practice. So again, Wayne Teasdale coined the term interspirituality. To describe that type of dialogue. So that was a wonderful experience to be a part of this Snowmass Conference, because it, as long as the conference maintained the quality of the people who were members, it was a wonderful experience. But for that type of dialogue, there has to be someone who is mindful, or the group has to be mindful of the quality of the people who join, because you need to have, for that type of dialogue to be successful, you need to have people who are sincere practitioners, who have been practicing long enough to have depth in their tradition, and who also know their tradition, but are open to other traditions as well. One of the interesting things was that there were people who were invited into the conference who were not open when they first came, but gradually they became open, and it was a wonderful thing to see, a wonderful thing to watch. There was one man who was a Russian Orthodox priest, George. He's long passed away. He passed away while I was still a member of the Snowmass Conference, while it was still continuing. It's stopped now, some years ago. But George came with the idea that the Russian, not only Christianity is the only religion, but rather Russian Orthodoxy is the true form of Christianity. But as he would speak from his own tradition and his own experience, several people would say, well, you sound like a Buddhist. And so what do you mean I sound like a Buddhist? I've never studied Buddhism. But he began to study Buddhism. And in that way, he began to see that he shared much in common with Buddhism, with Vedanta, with other traditions. And so it had a wonderful expanding influence on him. He went from being somebody who was very narrow in his orthodoxy to being someone who was still a Russian Orthodox priest, deep in his own tradition, but who saw that the walls were no longer necessary. The walls were falling down. And as I said, we saw that with Father Thomas Keating, who said, I don't know if this is good Christian doctrine. It may not be Christian doctrine at all. But nowadays I see like this. And so you often would sound like a Vedantist or a Buddhist as well. So it was this that Swami Vivekananda initiated, this idea of seeing religion from the standpoint of experience. Sri Ramakrishna was the exemplar of that. Now, as we know in Hinduism, there has always been, from Vedic times, a tendency towards liberality. There have been movements within Hinduism which were narrow and sectarian and which argued with everyone else. Luckily, within Hinduism, there were never religious wars, but there were periods and sects that became very narrow. But there was always this other tendency coming from the Vedas themselves, through the Upanishads, through the whole millennia of tradition of Hinduism, of liberalism, which is the great wealth of Hinduism. We here in Houston were in the early days criticized for having Buddha and Jesus on our altar and offering incense to them. And oh, they're not Hindus because they have shrines to Buddha and Jesus. They're not Hindus. It's because we are Hindus that we have a shrine to Buddha and to Jesus. And we could have other shrines as well, to other figures of other religions as well. It's because we're Hindus that we can do that. And that should never be forgotten. That narrowness which is coming into Hinduism now, it's understandable because Hinduism has been under attack for many centuries. And so when you're under attack, you group together and you sort of close in on yourself to protect yourself. But that's not the way to protect Hinduism. Hinduism's great strength is its openness and its liberality. And if that's lost, it's not really any longer Hinduism. I've told this story before, but not for a long time. When I was at Mayavati, there was a Trappist monk, Father Basil Pennington, who passed away many years ago. And I had met Father Basil in America at our Ganges, Michigan monastery where I lived in the early 70s. And in the late 70s, it was probably 1979, I received a letter from one of our monks in America, an American monk, saying that Father Basil was coming to India. So I wrote to Father Basil and said, I hear you're coming to India. Why don't you come to visit our monastery in the Himalayas? It's a contemplative monastery. I think you'll like it. So please come. So he wrote back and said he would. It turns out he ended up going to Belar Mutt. He met Swami Nirvananandaji and other swamis. He went to Varanasi to see our ashram there, and then he came to Mayavati and stayed with us for several days. So I had told the local villagers, Mayavati is in the middle of the forest, several miles from the closest village, but we had interchange with the villagers who would come to the ashram for various things, and we had a hospital to treat local people. So I had told the local villagers that a Christian monk was coming, and they were uneducated people, but they knew that Christianity was the foreigner's religion. So they knew what it was. They didn't know much about it, but they knew that it was not Hinduism. And because in that area there was an Anglo-Indian settlement not far from Mayavati, just maybe 10 miles away from Mayavati, which was a Christian settlement. And so they knew basically that Christianity was a foreign religion. But I told them that this sadhu of the Christians is coming here. So one day I told Father Basil after he came, let's go for a walk through the mountains, just so you can see this beautiful scenery here. So we were walking down a forest path, far from the ashram and far from villages, when a group of villagers, about 10 villagers, were coming towards us. They were coming to cut fodder for their cows. And when they saw us coming, he in his white and black Trappist robe, and me, of course, in my Gerawa cloth, walking together, they put down their tools and came over and went to him to make pranam. And so he turned to me, Father Basil turned to me and said, no, you tell them, I'm not one of them, I'm not one of them. And so I said, Father Basil, they know that you're not one of them. They know that you're a Christian monk. That doesn't matter at all to them. It's the fact that you're a holy man, that's the only thing that matters to them. And he was struck with surprise at that. But that was true. These were villagers, uneducated people. They didn't even know much about Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda except their names. They were just simple Hindu peasants without education, but they knew that what's important is holiness, spirituality. And wherever that's found, then we bow down to that. And so to this Christian monk and the Hindu monk by his side, we make pranam to both of them. And so that is the Hindu spirit. And so that interspiritual dimension of Hinduism has always been there since Vedic times. And that should never be lost. That which allowed Hindus to respect Sufi peers, Christian saints, Jesus, and spirituality wherever it is found. So after Swami Vivekananda brought the idea of interspirituality to America, there were several developments. There were Ananda Kumara Swami, who was from Sri Lanka, a Hindu from Sri Lanka, Tamilian from Sri Lanka, who eventually came to this country and was a great intellect. He wrote some very important books. I was very surprised in my middle age when I saw my father once. He said that he had read Ananda Kumara Swami's The Dance of Shiva. And so that's something I had never expected in my life, that he would come across a book of Ananda Kumara Swami. But Ananda Kumara Swami was a follower of the idea of the perennial philosophy, that there is one truth which is expressed in many different ways, and that different philosophies have tried in different ways to express it. And then there was Aldous Saxley, who was deeply influenced by Vedanta, by Ramakrishna, by Swami Vivekananda. He was a member of the Vedanta Society of Southern California for many years. And he wrote a very influential book called The Perennial Philosophy. The term perennial philosophy goes back to the 15th century, to a Renaissance thinker. But the perennial philosophy means the philosophy which is eternal. It actually means the same thing as Sanatana Dharma. Though, of course, in a Western context, it's not applied to Hinduism, but it means that there is an eternal truth which is expressed in various ways in various traditions. So Aldous Huxley wrote the book, The Perennial Philosophy, with that idea. And then there were others like Martin Lings, an Englishman, René Guénon, a Frenchman, and Fritjof Schoen, a German-Swiss scholar, who promoted the idea of the perennial philosophy. They all converted to Islam, but the Sufi form of Islam, the mystical form, and they were deep students of Vedanta as well, lovers of Vedanta, as well as Sufism and Christian mysticism, Jewish Kabbalah, and so forth. Though their own tradition was, though they were all Westerners, their own tradition was the Sufi tradition. In fact, my very best friend in India, who died a few years ago when I was living in India, he was a Muslim from Kolhapur who became a Hindu Swami. His family had been influenced by Fritjof Schoen and Martin Lings and that whole tradition. And Sufis that I've met, traditional Sufis I've met from Pakistan, they also are followers of Fritjof Schoen and René Guénon. Hussein Nasser, I forget his first name. It's actually a title, but I forget it. Hussein Nasser, a great Sufi scholar at George Washington University, he also is a follower of those same people. So they also promoted this idea of the perennial philosophy, which is the basis of interspirituality. That can we find those points of similarity between our various traditions? Now, there are those, like there was a Stephen Katz, who wrote an influential article back in the 1980s saying that there is no such thing as a perennial philosophy, that all of our religious perceptions are so conditioned by social perceptions and doctrine and dogma that no one can understand one religion from another religion, that each religion teaches different things, they all are aiming at different things, and there is no commonality among the religions. They're all distinct and different. And so that is a contrary trend which has become popular nowadays. One of the, I would call it a sickness of the West, is the constant desire for newness. Everything has to be new, everything has to be improved. And if a new idea comes along challenging all previous ideas, then people say, oh, wow, look at that. It challenges everything that came before. There must be something here. Let's go with this, just because it's new. And so this has had that sort of effect, that suddenly it's become popular to say that all religions are different. And I've had many discussions with one of my dear friends, Ed Bastian, a Buddhist scholar, who is of that school, not because he was influenced by Stephen Katz's article, I don't know if he's even seen it, but just because from his Buddhist standpoint, he doesn't see any reason to believe that there's any commonality among the religions. But if each religion teaches a different truth, what kind of truth is that? Each religion teaches, or the mystics, not the theologians and the hierarchs, but the mystics of each tradition have said that they have penetrated to the very nature of reality itself, whether they call it God or self or Buddhist enlightenment or whatever it is. They say they've penetrated to reality itself. In the case of Christian mystics and Sufi mystics and Jewish mystics, they go beyond all ideas of God. Meister Eckhart said, when I go beyond God and everything that has to do with God, then I attain to that which I always was, am, and will be forever. And then I know that I and God are one. So such people have gone beyond everything that pertains to any idea of God we could have, any social conditioning, anything like that. And so how many different truths like that could there be? If you've gone beyond all social conditioning, you've gone beyond everything that is anthropomorphic, that is human-centric, that which is part of your human nature, which limits you to seeing in a human type of way, and you've penetrated to the heart of reality itself, then is that not going to be a common reality that you attain to? Holy Mother had the wonderful statement that she said that all birds sing in different ways, but we all call it the chirping of birds. Meaning, she was referring to the statements of the saints of different religions, that yes, they may speak in different ways, but we recognize a commonality to all of it. If you read the statements of a Sufi mystic, if you read the statements of a Vedantic saint, Avadhut, if you read the statements of the greatest Christian mystics and the Buddhist mystics, then you find that you can't find a reason for saying, oh no, this is completely different. If you look at it from the standpoint of theology, yes, you can find all sorts of differences, because that's what theology does. It makes distinctions. But if you see the depths, you find that there is that commonality. So in my experience in the Snowmass Conference, one of the things that I learned was to listen to other traditions and to be open to other traditions. When I first was invited to become a part of the Snowmass Conference, I thought that I already was good at that because of my Vedantic training. I already had the belief that all religions are basically true. But when I went and actually met with the deep practitioners of other traditions, I saw that I had misunderstood many things about them. I had made superficial equations between, say, Hinduism and Buddhism, and I saw that no, there were significant differences. Not that, again, at the highest point that they are different. But at the level of practice and so forth, there are differences. I also learned at Snowmass, through a set of circumstances, which I won't go into now, that each of us dwells within a mythic framework, even people who are not religious. That is, the people of a particular religious tradition, like the Hindu tradition, or the Buddhist tradition, or the Christian tradition, or the Jewish tradition. They have a certain way of looking at life, at looking at themselves, at looking at the world, a certain way of explaining things. If you go to a Christian and ask them about the nature of the world, the nature of the individual self and all of that, you'll get a very different answer from what you'll get from a Hindu or from a Muslim, or from a Jew. So each of us lives within a mythic realm, a realm of values. Even the person who's an atheist and believes only in scientific inquiry, they also have their own values dependent upon their scientific convictions, their own values about what is real and what is unreal, what is of value and what is not of value. For many such who are scientific atheists or agnostics, only that which is objective and can be measured and which can be replicated and shown to another objectively, only that is true, only that is real. And so love, goodness, freedom, all of those things, those are just fuzzy ideas. Show me the facts. Show me the facts. Let me measure it. If it can't be measured, it's not worth dealing with. It's just some fuzzy emotional stuff. So they also live within a mythic realm where they have their own idea of what's real, what's unreal, what is of value, what's not of value, what other people are like, how I should treat other people, how I should treat the world. Each of us lives within this mythic universe. And so a religious tradition is an integral whole. So the goal of interspirituality is not to take a little bit from this tradition, a little bit from that, a little bit, the things that you like from each tradition, put them in a bag, shake them up and pour it out, and then you've got your own shake and bake religion that is your own form of religion. No, that's not the goal of it. As Sri Ramakrishna showed, when he followed any tradition, he even dressed in the way that tradition dressed. He wanted to eat the food of that tradition. He did the practices of that tradition and so forth, because he recognized the integrity of each religious tradition. And so that's one of the things that I learned much deeper when I came to the Snowmass Conference, the integrity of each tradition. And that their beliefs are not just things that we, with our view from a different perspective, we think, well, they believe these things, but those are just sort of silly. If they see the real truth, then they'll give those things up. But no, they see those things as an integral part of their tradition. Like someone I know who was a pharmacist, he worked in the Virgin Islands as a pharmacist for the head of the pharmacy was a Pakistani Muslim. And so once the Pakistani Muslim had ordered some donuts, and somebody brought the donuts, and so he took one, and he bit into it, and then suddenly he thought, oh, but you asked before you bought these whether they were cooked in pig fat, didn't you? And the person said, no, I didn't ask that. And so he went and threw up. Ran to the bathroom and forced himself to throw up because maybe the donut. So the pharmacist told me later, told me that this is so silly. What a few molecules of a pig in his system, what harm is that going to do? So I explained that, well, no, it's not a question of doing scientific harm. No, it's not going to do any scientific harm to him. But because not eating the flesh of pigs is part of what he considers being a good Muslim, and he's done something which is forbidden to him as a good Muslim. So it fits into a whole, integrated whole of what should and should not be done. I've had so many people ask why it is that Hindus won't eat cows, as if that's the most important thing in the world is to get Hindus to eat cows. And so I usually ask back, oh, why won't Americans eat dogs? There's plenty of people around the world who eat dogs. Why won't Americans eat dogs? So it's why do you pick it one thing? But Americans won't eat dogs because it's part of the whole culture here that dogs are like part of the family. In fact, sometimes people love their dogs more than they love their family. And so it's you can't talk an American out of not eating dogs. It's just part of the way of perceiving things. And so with Hindus and cows, Muslims and pigs and so forth. So I learned from my experience at Snowmass that we have to look at religions as an integral whole. We may not agree with everything in every tradition. We won't agree. Certainly from a Vedantic standpoint, we don't agree with everything from every tradition. But we have to start from the standpoint of understanding the tradition from within itself. And so that's part of interspirituality, that you recognize the integrity of each tradition, But from the standpoint of Sri Ramakrishna, of course, we recognize something else, which is somewhat unconsciously recognized by many in the interspiritual movement, but not given voice because it's not quite considered yet acceptable. What we recognize from Sri Ramakrishna is that each religion is pointing at the same reality. Whether we call it God, whether we call it Brahman or the self, whether we call it the state of enlightenment of the Buddhist, they don't believe in God or the self, either one, but they believe in a state of enlightenment which is all-knowing, which is sarvagnya, all-knowing. And so whatever you call it, that we're all pointing towards one reality, and that different religions or different ways in according to the logic of their own integral whole, they go towards this infinite reality. So that was a great discovery for me. One of the things I learned in tune with that is that religions can be looked at as different languages of the spirit. Swami Vivekananda said that the original Vedic idea was that there's only religion. There are not religions. There's just religion. The Vedas recognized that there was a universal impulse in the human heart to know deep spiritual reality, and that people did it in different ways. He said that the idea of different religions came into India through the Buddhist teachers. When they taught that we're not like you, and Buddhists are still doing that. Buddhists are still continually distinguishing themselves from everybody else, especially from Hindus, but not just Hindus, but others. We're not like you, we're not like you, we're not like this, we're not like that. Pushing everybody else away and defining themselves by what they're not like. And so because the Buddhists define themselves outside of Hinduism, that idea of different religions came into India. Because suddenly you had a tradition which didn't want to be part of the others. But the original Vedic idea, that's what Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda came to bring back. The idea that religion is one thing, it's one impulse. People do it in different ways. And that's why Swami Vivekananda said, I'm not against sects, I'm against sectarianism. I wish that sects would go on multiplying until each person is a sect unto themselves, that each person finds their own unique way to find God, to come to truth, to come to spirituality. That let everyone have their own Bible, let everyone have their own ritual, let everyone have their own practice. Now, of course, he meant that not in the sense that you have to go home and write your own Bible and make up your own ritual. No. But it does mean that he was promoting the idea of the integrity of each person, not just the integrity of each spiritual tradition. And he felt that Hinduism offered, not that everyone should become Hindu, but that Hinduism offered a model of that. Because in Hinduism, the ideal has been the realization of the truth. And if you find a new way to do that, that doesn't hurt other people, and doesn't hurt society, then that's good. You can follow it. In Hinduism itself, there are so many rituals, there are so many mythologies, there are so many ideals, Ishta Devatas, so many ways of doing things, so many practices. And so Hinduism is often criticized by Western scholars, and now some Indian scholars have taken up the banner also to say that there's no such thing as Hinduism. Hinduism is not a religion. It's just a lot of diverse practices that people follow, but there's no such thing as Hinduism. Well, no, as Swami Vivekananda said, there is such a thing as Hinduism. There are unifying principles, but those principles are broad and inclusive rather than exclusive. The Western model of religion is that I believe this, that, and the other. I don't believe this, that, and the other. I do this, that, and the other. I don't do that and the other. To define oneself and exclude oneself from others, and to define oneself narrowly, and then you have a religion. And everybody who accepts this creed with these narrow definitions, they belong to my church, or my synagogue, or my mosque. And everybody who doesn't accept these, they're outside, and they are heathen, they're pagan, they're anathema, they're wrong. But Hinduism doesn't do that, and that's why there's such vast diversity in Hinduism. And so Swami Vivekananda saw within that the model for what could be a universal religion, which makes room for everyone, which makes a place for everybody. And that really, though it's not the aim of those who promote interspirituality, they promote it just with the idea of, let's see what is in all of the different traditions. Let's be open to every tradition. Let's see what they have to offer. Let's see what their practices do and everything. But really, in time, there will be a deeper interspirituality which recognizes the truth at the heart of each tradition, and that each tradition is going towards a common universal truth, a truth which is beyond doctrine, a truth which is beyond creed, a truth which is beyond mythology. All of the various stories of the Puranas and so forth, those are beautiful, they're meaningful, they express truths, but they're not the highest truth. So Swami Vivekananda said, we, meaning Vedantists, we can accept the Bible and the Quran as Puranas. A Purana, the definition of a Purana, the traditional Sanskrit definition of a Purana, is a text which deals with the lineages of kings and kingdoms, which deals with history, which deals with the lineages of sages, the lineages of sages coming down from ancient times, which tells stories of ancient people and tells of the ancient culture and so forth. That's what a Purana is defined as. And that's really what the Bible and the Quran do. They really fit the definition of a Purana. They're not telling the stories of the Vedic civilization, but they're telling the stories of their civilizations. But to Swami Vivekananda, the real Veda was not not the books we call the Vedas, though he gave great importance to them and thought that they should be studied. But that Veda means the repository of spiritual laws. Just as science is the repository of scientific laws about the nature of the physical universe, so Veda really means the infinite spiritual knowledge, which deals with the principles, the basic truths of the nature of God, the nature of the self, the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness, etc. Those things which can be experienced and which can be replicated in each individual's experience if we go through the necessary practices. And so that Swamiji saw as Veda. He said that the infinite knowledge of God can't be confined within the covers of even the biggest book. And to say that it can is the worst kind of idol worship, to say that my Bible, my Quran, my Veda contains all of infinite knowledge. That if it's not in my book, then it doesn't exist or it's not true. No. Veda means the infinite repository of spiritual truth. And the books, the Vedas, are honored because they contain many of those truths. So again, let me say in concluding that first, that one of our swamis in India who passed away some time ago, he started saying that, and a very fine swami, a wonderful swami, and one who contributed a lot to our work, but he was fed up with interreligious work. He said, we invite Christians and Muslims to our ashramas and they speak, but it doesn't make any difference. So what should we have to do with interreligious dialogue? We should stop the interreligious dialogue. Christians and Muslims will never change. They'll never accept our ideas and so forth. But as I never spoke to him because I didn't see him to speak to. But I did speak to others who repeated what he said, that this whole idea of bringing speakers from different traditions together, just giving them a forum, and then they go away and nothing has changed, that's just a useless exercise. Well, yes, I can see the point of that, but that's not interspiritual dialogue. Just inviting a few people to come and each one speaking of their own things and then going away and what has been accomplished? Not much has been accomplished. But if you bring people who know their tradition, who can speak from it, and we can listen and learn from it, then we are enriched. We have two eyes. Why? Why is there advantage to having two eyes? It's not just that we look nicer than if we just had one eye, so it's for appearance sake. No, it's because it gives us depth perception. In 3D video, how do they make 3D video? They have two cameras that are slightly set apart from each other, taking a picture of the same scene. And that's what our eyes do. They see the same thing, but from slightly different perspectives. And the brain puts that together, as the brain does when we see a 3D film with the help of those special glasses. The brain puts together a 3D image. We get the sense of depth perception. And so by learning about other religious traditions, being open to other religious traditions, not leaving my tradition, no, but learning about others with sympathy, then we learn a different way of looking at the same religious problems. Just as if I know more than one language, I learn different ways of expressing the same thing. Spanish may have a way of expressing an idea which is different from the English way of expressing it or the Bengali way of expressing it. Each one has its strength. And if I know more than one language, then I can express myself more easily. And even in my native language, I bring the richness of having studied these other languages into my native tongue. And so by learning something of other religions, then we broaden our heart, we broaden our sympathy. We also get the ability to look at things from a different perspective, not to leave our perspective, but to enhance our perspective. And so that's the great value of interreligious dialogue. So our purpose in interreligious or interspiritual dialogue is not to change the people who come and make them accept us. No, it's to learn, to listen, to speak from a standpoint of depth and hope that they will do the same, open up. And in that process, I myself have seen that if it's done over a period of time, people do change. People do change. We're at a point in the world now where we have to live together. We have to live together. There are people who want India to be all Hindu. There are people who want India to be all Muslim. But there are too many of both so that it's, that it's going to be only one or the other. And the country would be poorer if it were just one thing. And so we have to learn to live together and to understand each other. Some others have told me, well, the other party doesn't want to understand us, so why should we try to understand them? Well, no, don't wait for the other party to be open to you. You first be open, and then in time, that will melt their resistance. I've seen it over and over again. And so learn to be open to others. Be strong in your own faith. Don't let anyone abuse you. Don't let others push you out of your space. But at the same time, don't be defensive so that you're ready to hit somebody else over the head before they have a chance to hit you over the head. Speaking figuratively. So we need to learn to respect the ideas and the traditions of others. So let us not be Ramakrishna fanatics either, saying that, well, Ramakrishna was the best and the final incarnation and everybody should come to Ramakrishna because he realized all religions are true, so everybody should come to him. Well, that is going against what you just said, that he said all religions are basically true. So Sri Ramakrishna himself went out of his way to meet great people. When he heard that there was a great musician or a great spiritual person from any tradition in the area in Calcutta, then he would ask Sridhar or others to take him to meet this person. He went out of his way to meet great spiritual people and even great people in secular fields. So we also should have that sort of liberality. In the beginning, we need to have Ishta Nishtha, that is, firm faith in our own Ishta, so that goes deep, so that's not challenged. Otherwise, if we're on the surface and try move from thing to thing, then we become wishy-washy. We don't have any roots. We don't have any roots going deep. But once we have sent roots deep, we have our Ishta, we know what our path is, and we feel firm, then we need to open our heart to others. And let us never lose that which is the wealth of Hinduism, which is recognizing spirituality wherever we find it, and bowing to it wherever we find it. So with that, I'll close. I'll ask for 1 or 2 questions if there are any, and then I'll give announcements. Because I have to close on time. Oh, I forgot, we've got Arati today. I'm sorry, I can't take question and answers because I have another talk at 1 o'clock. And I have to have a break before that. I can't go straight from this to Arati to the next talk. So I apologize for not leaving time for question and answers. I forgot that that we're having Arati. I'm glad we're having Arati again, but I forgot about it, and that has taken away the time. So let me give announcements, and then we'll have Arati. So for announcements, on Tuesday we will have the Katha Upanishad class at 7:30 as usual. And on Thursday, we will have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class at 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm sorry that this past Thursday, when we were to begin the Gospel class again, I had to cancel it because the day I got at the last minute a notice, an email saying that a big truck delivery was coming Thursday morning to Trinity that I had to be there to unload. It was a huge job. We had to hire people to come and help with the unloading, but I had to be there, so there was no way out. So we canceled the class last Thursday, but we will begin the gospel again this Thursday, God willing. And then next Sunday, I will speak on Sri Krishna. I forget the exact title that I gave, but it was Sri Krishna as the embodiment of divine delight. And that's in honor of the fact that we already had Krishna Janmashtami, but we were not yet open at that time. And today I wanted to speak in honor of the Parliament of Religions and Swamiji's contribution. And so next Sunday I'll have the chance to speak about Sri Krishna. So our Sunday lectures from now on, as far as we know, will be open by registration only. So if you register, we'll send out every week, we'll send out a new registration. If you registered for the lecture today, it was only for today's lecture. So for next Sunday, we'll send out the beginning of the week, another registration for next week. But you're welcome to register up to the maximum number, which is 20. And Tuesdays and Thursdays will be online only, live streamed only. And then the last announcement is on October 9th, we will have Durga Puja, our annual Durga Puja. We had hoped that this year we could do it in person, out in the tent, as we have done for many years. But because of the rise in COVID cases once again, we've decided to have it live streamed as we did last year because of COVID. So the Durga Puja will be live streamed, but after the puja is over, and we'll send out in plenty of time a notice about the timings. But after the puja and the arati is over, those who wish can come, and one family group at a time can come in, pay their respects to the image, offer flowers, pushpanjali, and receive blessed food, prasad. So you will be able to come for that. So with that, let me give a closing chant and then arati. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apashanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace in the waters, peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. All is peace. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.